250 years ago today, 56 men signed their names to a document that said, essentially, that the existing government had forfeited its right to govern, and that something better was possible. Today, 110 million Americans are under extreme heat alerts. The Great American State Fair on the National Mall closed this afternoon because it was too hot to safely stay open, and two separate organizations with competing political identities are both trying to claim ownership of the same national birthday. 60 ships from 30 nations are gathered in New York Harbor right now for the largest maritime assembly in the history of the United States. Happy 250th birthday, America. Let's talk about all of it. Start with the birthday itself, because the story of how this country chose to mark its 250th year is genuinely worth examining as something more than a scheduling dispute. When Congress passed legislation in 2016 establishing a bipartisan United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission, America 250, the premise was simple. A once-in-a-century national milestone deserves a once-in-a-century national effort, built across party lines, funded with public money, and designed to engage every American community, regardless of political affiliation. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, along with their spouses, serve as honorary national co-chairs. The commission developed 10 years of programming, America's Field Trip, inviting students to define what America means to them. America Gives, a national volunteering initiative, community potlucks, town hall events, civic education programs. It is, by every account, a genuinely bipartisan and substantive effort. Then, in 2025, the Trump administration stood up a parallel and competing operation, the White House Task Force on Celebrating America's 250th Birthday, publicly branded Freedom 250. This organization operates as a public-private partnership, chaired by Trump himself, with an aesthetic and messaging framework that critics, including some state officials, have described as more campaign rally than civic celebration. By the end of 2025, $10 million worth of funding, originally directed toward America 250, had been diverted to Freedom 250's Freedom Trucks. Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman stated in early 2026 that America 250 had received only $25 million of its congressionally appropriated $150 million, raising concerns that the remainder would be redirected to the Trump-aligned operation. The result, as CNN's National Mood piece published this week put it, is a confusing slate of dueling 250th anniversary celebrations, with the distinctions between America 250 and Freedom 250 unclear to those not following the ins and outs of the dispute. CNN quoted a 66-year-old woman named Edie from Las Vegas. "How I feel right now is that this is a celebration for a political party. And if you're not a member, it's not that you're not invited. You don't want to go to the party." That sentiment shows up in the participation numbers. By June, the New York Times was describing the state fair controversy, 7 states having pulled out, as the latest sign that the national 250th birthday celebration has become a fragmented and partisan affair as the president seeks his imprint. Trump spoke at Mount Rushmore, returning to the site exactly 6 years after his last 4th of July address there, and offered a speech that hit familiar themes: American greatness, the specter of communism, the approach of the November midterms. He called communism a mortal threat to American liberty, akin to 9/11, and urged Republicans not to allow ourselves to lose the midterms. His remarks about Iran, delivered almost parenthetically near the speech's end, were notable precisely because of their tone. They're dying to settle. They want to settle so badly. We gave him a week off for a funeral because we're nice. That is Trump's own public characterization on the country's 250th birthday of what has functioned as a humanitarian pause in active military operations following the death of Iran's supreme leader. "We gave him a week off" is one way to describe that. It is not, by any diplomatic standard, how you describe a formal decision made during an ongoing and still unresolved war. The counterpoint to Trump's Mount Rushmore speech, and it is a genuine, documented counterpoint, not an invented one, came from Rome, via live stream from an entirely unexpected figure, Pope Leo XIV, the first American to lead the Catholic Church, accepted the 2026 Liberty Medal from the National Constitution Center on the eve of the 250th birthday. His speech is worth reproducing closely because it covers ground that the birthday's official programming has largely avoided. Leo said America's founding ideals made it a byword for freedom around the world as it opened its doors to successive waves of immigrants. He described the founding promise as a work in progress that each generation must preserve. He urged repeatedly, and without naming any specific policy, that the United States recommits to human dignity, liberty, and unity. Since becoming the first American pope, Leo has spoken consistently about the treatment of migrants. He did not name immigration policy in last night's speech. He did not need to. The Liberty Medal, given by the National Constitution Center, went to the leader of the Catholic Church on the eve of America's 250th birthday. And the American who holds that position used it to say to his home country that human dignity is the founding promise that must not be abandoned. 2 speeches, 1 national birthday, 2 very different theories of what the country's founding actually means and what it requires from the generation alive right now. Now the heat, because the weather today is not a background condition for the celebrations. It is, in several significant places, the event itself. More than 110 million Americans are under extreme heat risk today, according to the National Weather Service. More than 150 million remain under some form of heat alert, stretching from Kansas to Maine. Philadelphia is forecast to hit 103 degrees Fahrenheit, just 1 degree shy of its all-time July record of 104, set in 1954. New York City's Central Park reached 100 degrees yesterday, its first triple-digit reading since 2012, and is forecast to hit 102 today. Washington, D.C.'s forecast is similarly severe. The direct effect on today's events has been concrete and immediate. Philadelphia's Wawa Welcome America Parade, one of the country's oldest July 4th celebrations, drawing hundreds of thousands annually, was canceled. The Great American State Fair on the National Mall, the Freedom 250 centerpiece event that has already had its share of difficulties this season, temporarily closed this afternoon due to dangerous heat. A parade planned for Washington, D.C. was also canceled. Freedom 250's own heat advisory update, published this morning, added free hydration stations throughout the Washington Monument grounds and urged attendees to take breaks from the sun and seek shade, which is the organizers' way of acknowledging in administrative language that an outdoor event they have been planning for a year is taking place in conditions that are medically dangerous for many of the people expected to attend. I want to say this clearly, because the framing of heat events as weather, rather than climate, has become one of the most consequential editorial choices in modern journalism. The temperatures blanketing the eastern seaboard today are connected to the same global warming trend that killed more than 300 people across Europe in the final week of June alone. I covered that story in detail when France recorded 1,000 excess deaths in a single week. That pattern, successive, intensifying, record-breaking heat events arriving in rapid succession, doesn't stay in Europe. It is the pattern of what a warmer world produces. It produced temperatures in Paris that broke June records, and it is producing temperatures in Philadelphia today that are within 1 degree of the all-time July record set 72 years ago. The U.S. government's own National Weather Service data confirms both of those facts independently. The irony of this being the 250th birthday celebration is not subtle. The administration's EPA, earlier this month, departed from a Biden-era report that detailed cancer risks from PFAS, forever chemicals, in contaminated farms, one indicator among many of a broader pattern of scaling back environmental health reporting. Built at extraordinary expense to showcase American prosperity on the National Mall, closed this afternoon because the air outside was too dangerous to breathe safely for extended periods. That connection between environmental policy choices and the physical conditions on the ground is not commentary. It is the observable sequence of events on July 4th, 2026. And now, the water, because it's the one story today that doesn't require a caveat or a critical lens. It just requires you to be able to see it. In New York Harbor right now, Sail 250 is underway. 60 ships from 30 countries. Tall ships, naval vessels. Sailing schooners, historic replicas, are gathered in a single body of water for what the organizers and multiple independent sources describe as the largest maritime gathering in United States history. The event is part of OpSail 2026, the 7th International Fleet Review, hosted by the United States Navy. Aircraft demonstrations, tall ship parades, waterfront concerts, and events running across the Hudson and East Rivers. By any measure, it is a genuinely spectacular maritime spectacle, the kind of thing that happens once in a generation. Tonight, when darkness falls, Macy's will launch its annual 4th of July fireworks display from two rivers simultaneously, the East River and the Hudson River, for the first time since 2000. More than 85,000 fireworks shells in 30 colors will be launched, along with laser effects projected from the Brooklyn Bridge. Millions of spectators across New York and New Jersey will have a direct viewing line to at least one of the two simultaneous displays. The dual river setup was last used 26 years ago and was brought back specifically for the semi-quincentennial. These two things, the fleet in the harbor, the fireworks from two rivers, are things that are simply true, simply happening, and simply beautiful. The country that signed the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago today received ships from 30 nations in its greatest harbor to mark the occasion. That is not nothing. That is not a partisan statement. That is what 250 years of participation in a world that eventually came to include this country as a permanent, irreplaceable presence looks like from the water. 3 stories on America's 250th birthday. A national celebration split into 2 competing events by 2 organizations with different visions of what the country is celebrating and for whom. A heat wave so severe it closed the National Mall's centerpiece attraction and canceled a parade in the city where the Declaration of Independence was signed. 103 degrees in Philadelphia on the day Philadelphia gave birth to the document. And 60 ships from 30 nations gathered in New York Harbor, with fireworks from 2 rivers tonight, because even a fractured country is still a country, and other countries still want to be in the harbor when it turns 250. Here's the thing about national birthdays. They don't pause because the country is complicated. They just arrive. And then you have to figure out what you actually think about the place, with all of it present at once. The heat, the politics, the tall ships, the closed fair, the papal speech from Rome, the fireworks, and you either find a way to hold all of it together or you don't. 250 years. The document said something better was possible. The question every generation has had to answer is whether they were willing to do the work of making it so. Tonight, looking at those fireworks, wherever you're watching them from, that question is still open. It has been every single year. That's the part about this country that, for all its failures, is genuinely remarkable. The question is still open.